Hello students, today's agenda is to check homework. We'll be working with the sine and cosine and you will be able to do 6.4. Today students will be able to use the sine and cosine ratios to find a side of a triangle. And we did some applications and real world problems in the previous lesson, but now we're just going to do this synthetically. Okay, so before we start with the first example, I just want to remind you from yesterday that we have sine of theta is equals to opposite over hypotenuse, and cosine of theta is equals to adjacent over hypotenuse. And we're just going to review. These are going to come up. We're not going to do any problems for the lesson, but they're going to appear on the assignment just because you already know how to do them. And tangent of theta is equals to opposite over adjacent. And so I want to introduce, so that now that we know all of them, I just want to give you the initials of sine, the initial of opposite, and the initial of hypotenuse. Same here, cosine, adjacent, hypotenuse, tangent, opposite, adjacent. So this is kind of like to remember, okay, a mnemonic device, which is SOHCAHTOA. And in class, I annoy my students by saying SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA several times, and I know it's annoying, but hopefully it will help you understand. And right now it doesn't, because I haven't explained what it is or how you use it, but again, it's just to remember the ratios, okay? So for sine is opposite over hypotenuse, for cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and for tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay. Now that we have that information, let's start with the first example. And so you have this triangle. And I know some students are still having some trouble identifying which one is the opposite, which one is the hypotenuse, and which one is the adjacent sides. Some people have trouble with that. Other people don't have trouble identifying them, but how to use them in the ratios that we have here. So hopefully today it clarifies. And so what I said is that the angle that they're giving us is this 45-degree angle, and you also have this 90-degree angle. Then if they're giving us information for the side that links those two, that's the adjacent. So that will be the adjacent. I think for most people, that's the most difficult one to find. And adjacent, that means that it's, you see here AA, so that means adjacent. So you're either going to use the tangent or the cosine. We'll see. The other information, and this is easy to find, is the longest side is always the hypotenuse. Okay, so let me, hypotenuse, longest side. Okay, and hypotenuse is only in the sine and cosine, but then we said that then we have the adjacent side, so that means that we're going to be using the ratio of cosine. So cosine of theta is adjacent over hypotenuse. And I'm just abbreviating here, which is fine with me. You don't have to write the whole thing. How do you find the opposite? In this case, we don't have, the opposite is straight in front. Okay, and I'm just giving you that in general information. That's the opposite of the angle that they're giving us, okay? But in here we don't have any information, so we don't even pay attention to the opposite. That means we don't need those two ratios, okay? Okay, so those are some ways to figure out. Opposite is straight in front of the angle that you are talking about. Hypotenuse is the longest side, and the adjacent is the last one that it's a little bit more difficult to identify. But again, that adjacent side is always between the angle that you're talking about and the right angle. maybe I should write that in here. Adjacent between, it's always between the angle that we're talking about and the 90-degree angle. Okay, so the two angles that they're giving us, that's the adjacent side. Okay, so now that we know that we're going to be using cosine of theta, it's just the measurement of the angle, which is 45. Adjacent is the one that is right at, I would say adjacent, attached to that angle, but it's not the longest. Okay, so that will be adjacent is attached to that angle, which is 5. And hypotenuse is the longest side. In here, it's always opposite of the right angle, so it's x. Now you have these, I showed you a trick of, oh, you just switch these two. Okay, whenever you have x in the denominator, send it here and the cosine of 45 here. So you switch those. If you want to see why, let me show you the work. Okay, we are going to, if we're dividing by x, we multiply by x. Cancel that, and you end up with 5 equals, this you just bring down, x times cosine of 45. If we're multiplying, the opposite is to divide by cosine of 45. And here you can draw the degrees if you want or not, it's okay. That cancels, and you end up with x equals, and you're gonna use the calculator to find this answer. Now, I told you before that there are different kinds of calculators, maybe like 4 types, but I know that they follow 2 different orders. So mine is kind of backwards. Make sure that you have it in degree, okay? So if not, there is a degree button and you press, it becomes rad, it says grad or dig, okay? So you're gonna have it in degrees, and mine follows this path. You're gonna press the 5, the number in here is like 5 divided by, and then cosine of 45, but this is backwards in mine. So it's 5, then divide by, then my calculator you need to put 45. For some other calculators you put cos first, okay? Then I press cos, then equal. So I'm going to show you, and then I'll write down the way for the other calculators. You can try it, and when you get the right answer, that's the pattern that you need to do. So some other calculators, they switch this in here. So it's going to be 5 divided by 45. Then you press cosine and equal. So the answer is 7.07106. We can round to the tenths. It doesn't indicate here, so it can be to the tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So it all depends on what they ask. And here we're just gonna round it to the nearest hundredths. Hundredths is 1, 2. Okay, tenths, hundredths. If it was to the tenths, then it will become a 1, 7.1, and then the rest disappears. Okay, what is the path for the other calculator? Well, I already said that it's the same, except that you switch. The 5 stays the same, divided by stays the same. Then in here, instead of 45, you press cosine first, then 45. Then something that you don't need to do in this one is close the parentheses, and finally equal. Okay, so try it with this one. If it comes up with a different answer, or if it says error, try with this path. And if yours works with this one, then just remember that you have to first put the sine, cosine, or tangent, and then the degrees. Okay, so whichever path you take, keep that one, and then maybe cross the other one, because you don't want to have notes for calculator that you don't need to use, or leave it and say not my calculator, okay, so that in case you are helping friends, you can actually help them with their path if they're using a different calculator. Okay, let's go to another example, and I'm gonna leave my SOHCAHTOA right here with me. Okay, now the angle that we're using is up here, this angle right here, and then the 90-degree angle is here. Between that, we already said that it's between the angle and the 90-degree angle is adjacent, but I don't have any information in here, so I don't have an adjacent. So basically I can cancel or ignore tangent. I can just say that I'm not going to be using cosine either, because both of those have adjacent and I don't have adjacent, so I'm going to go directly to sine. Sine of theta is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, and you can use this one, SOHCAHTOA, or just put opposite over hypotenuse. It's the same, right? Sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA. So sine is opposite. I will recommend for you to write it every time, at least the like a little abbreviation, hype for hypotenuse. Okay, so the sine of theta is 75. That's the degrees. Which one is the opposite? Well, it's the one straight in front of that angle. Okay, I always draw little arrows so that I don't get confused. So opposite is x, and the hypotenuse, which is the longest side, is 2. If you notice, the hypotenuse always goes in the denominator when we have it. And if we don't have it, that means it's going to be tangent, as easy as that. Okay, hypotenuse always goes in the denominator. Okay, so now, if I'm dividing by 2, the opposite is to multiply by 2. This cancels, and so x is equal to, now this is not division like the previous one, is multiplication. Now x is by itself, so I don't need to do any more movements. In my calculators, I kind of go backwards. I start with 75 sine times, I need to include that times. Some people forget that time. Let me write times in here because I don't want you confusing it with x, times 2. And then you press the equal symbol. Okay, so I go backwards because in my calculator I put 75 sine times, represented by the parentheses, 2. Okay, so looking here, I'm going to put 75 sine, it's not times in here, sine times, now I press times 2, equal, and the measurement of that next side is 193 meters. Oh, I forgot to put that in here. It's 7.7 inches. Okay, make sure you write down the unit of measurement. How would you write it for the other calculators? What you're gonna do is just go in this direction. Okay, so it's pretty much straightforward how it's given to us. So it's gonna be the 2 first times second sine 75. The only difference is that you're gonna close parentheses and equal. Okay, but it's just like it is. 2 times sine 75, close parentheses, and then equal. And you will get this answer. Again, try it with both. But if you already knew for the first one that it worked for this one, then it's gonna be the second one. Okay, this is like mine. This is opposite of mine. Okay, let me leave my SOHCAHTOA right there. And Let me do more examples. So you have a third one here. Again, I want to make sure that we have the SOHCAHTOA in front of us. So this is my angle, the angle that is given, and the 90-degree angles. Do we have adjacent? Yes. So it's either this one or this one. Okay, either tangent or cosine. Teacher, but you said that you were not going to talk about tangent. Oh, okay. Okay, so I have adjacent. The longest side, I also have that information. I don't have anything with opposite. So the opposite I don't have, that means I'm not going to use any of this. Okay? I have adjacent because it's between the two angles. And I have the hypotenuse because it's the longest side. So adjacent and hypotenuse, that means I'm going to be using the cosine of theta equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay, so cosine of the theta is my angle measurement. Adjacent is between that angle and the 90-degree angle, which is x, and the hypotenuse is 1. Again, we want to leave x by itself so that we know what the measurement of that is. And if we're dividing, we're going to multiply by 1. This cancels, and now x is isolated. And so in the calculator, mine goes that way. So I'm going to press 85 cosine, and I know multiply by 1 is just going to stay the same, but anyways, 85, then I press cosine, then I press times. Don't forget that times is right there, not between, and I don't know if it will change anything, but it's right there after you press cosine times 1. And it's going to be 0.09. Let me show you rounding just in case. So the answer in the calculator is this. Okay. If you want to round to the tenths, that means right here. So it's going to be 0. I look at the one in front, it's bigger than 5, so that means that it becomes a 1. That's it. Okay, this, because of this one, if this one is bigger than 5 or bigger, then you add 1 in here and the rest disappears. Hundredths. Okay, it's the second one. So the one that is going to tell me is the next one. Since it is bigger than 5, or bigger than 4, I should say, 5 or bigger, then you add 1 in here. That's what I wrote in here, which is 0.09. Thousandths. I can't remember if I spelled that right. Thousandths, you look at the third, and the one in front is not 5 or bigger, so that's gonna stay. It's gonna be 0.087. Okay, so that's rounded to the nearest tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. Okay, it all depends on what they're asking, and for me, you can use either tenths or hundredths. I prefer those, but if you just want to write as many as you want, that's even, I mean, you're just putting in a more accurate answer. So it's okay with me. Okay, so in here, I'm going a little faster because I feel that you're getting the hang of it, hopefully. That's the angle. That's the 90-degree angle. I don't have anything between that. That means I don't have adjacent, so you can cross that up. And so what are you using? Sine. So sine of theta is equals to, I don't want to look up there, opposite over hypotenuse. Okay, and so the opposite, well, sine of theta is the angle measurement. Opposite is always straight in front of that angle. And so it's going to be 4 over, hypotenuse is always straight in front of the 90-degree angle, so over x. Let me show you again with the trick that I showed you, that instead of doing like I did with the first example, you can just switch them, okay? So x becomes the sine of 24 equals 4 over sine of 24. Okay, so basically you just switch them. Whenever you have x in the denominator, you can just switch those. And I can show you in here because I know that some people are like, teacher, I already learned it the other way. I need to see it. Don't mind my Rocky. Okay, so in here, if you're dividing by x, you're going to multiply by x. This cancels. You get 4 equals x multiplied by the sine of 24. But x is not isolated, so you're going to divide by sine of 24, both sides. This cancels, and so x is equals to 4 of sine of 24. I could have just put it. So notice how in here, you just you're basically just switching them, and that's what happened here. See, the x is over here, the sine of 24. You can just, if it's okay with your teacher or professor, you can skip these steps because you can just swap them and you're gonna get the same, okay, as if you do the whole process. In the calculator, I just told them it's like a J. You start with 4 divided by 24 and then sine. That if it's like my calculator. If it's different from mine, it's just start with 4 divided by sine 24 and close parentheses equal. So it's kind of like an L for those that are opposite of mine. Okay, so the answer for x is 4 divided by 24 sine. And that's for my calculator. And then finally equal. So the measurement is 9 point, I'm just going to round it to the tenths this time. And don't forget your unit of measurement like I did in the previous one again. Okay, because I was explaining the rounding part. Okay, centimeters, feet. Okay, so let me see. For those that are using a different calculator, mine was 4 divided by 24 sine equal, okay? Don't forget that divided by. For the other calculator is 4 divided by sine 24 close parentheses and equal. Okay, so again, the only thing that changes is these two switch and you close parentheses at the end with the other calculators. Well, have fun with SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA, 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 SOHCAHTOA. Okay, and now you can do 6.4 with SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA. Bye-bye.